Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles. My name is Aaron and I have been married to Kayla for the last 17 years. We have a 16-year-old daughter named Judy. I work as a mechanical engineer at the local automobile factory, spending my days ensuring that machines run smoothly and production stays on track. It was a warm, sunny afternoon in March when my phone buzzed in my pocket, wiping the grease off my hands. I glanced at the screen. Gordon, my neighbor. Strange. He rarely called me during work hours. I swiped to answer. Aaron, you need to get home now. Gordon's voice was urgent, almost frantic. My stomach twisted. What's wrong? There's a moving van in front of your house. A couple of guys are loading furniture into it. My grip tightened around the phone. What? Who the hell? I don't know, but they're taking a lot of stuff. Your wife's there too. Thought you should know. Kayla, my pulse pounded in my ears. Are you sure? Positive. You better get here fast. I didn't waste another second shoving my phone into my pocket. I strode across the factory floor, my boots hitting the concrete with heavy thuds. My mind raced. Was this a daylight burglary or something worse? Reaching my boss's office, I knocked once before pushing the door open. Sir, I need to go right now. My boss, a gruff but reasonable man, looked up from his paperwork. What's going on? There's a burglary at my house. My neighbor just called. They're loading my stuff into a moving van. His eyes widened. Go now. I didn't wait for another word. I spun on my heel and ran for the parking lot, my heart hammering against my ribs, fumbling with my keys. I yanked, opened the car door, jumped inside and started the engine. The tires screeched against the pavement. As I tore out of the lot, my hands gripping the wheel like a vice. I had no idea what I was about to walk into, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a simple burglary and Kayla being there. That changed everything. I floored the gas and rushed to the spot. I reached the house, my tires screeching. As I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounded as I threw the car door open and stormed toward the driveway. There right in front of me was a man, tall, lean, with a cocky stance, giving instructions to two other men who were hauling my furniture into the back of a moving van. Hey, stop right there, I barked, marching toward him. The man barely spared me a glance, then muttered under his breath. Mind your damn business. That was it, that was all it took. Before I could even think, my fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling to the pavement. A sharp grunt escaped his lips as he hit the ground, but I wasn't done. I pounced on him, fist flying, rage boiling over, as I pounded him into the dirt. You think you can steal from me? I growled, landing another punch in broad daylight. Another punch. He groaned, trying to shield his face, but I wasn't about to let up with one hand. I grabbed my phone and punched in 911, barely controlling my breathing as I spoke. There's a man stealing from my home. I've subdued him, I said, my knuckles still clenched, ready to strike again. The dispatcher's voice was calm but firm. Sir, I need you to step inside your home and lock the door. Officers are on their way. I let out a bitter laugh. I can handle myself. Suddenly a shriek rang through the air. Aaron, what the hell are you doing? I turned my head and saw Kayla rushing toward us. Her face twisted in shock. She dropped to her knees beside the man, frantically checking his face, her hands trembling as she touched his bruised jaw. Why did you hit him? She screamed at me, her voice filled with outrage. I blinked, momentarily thrown off by her reaction. Do you know him? She snapped her head up, eyes blazing. Yes, he's my boyfriend. A cold wave of shock crashed over me. I felt the breath leave my lungs. What? That was all I managed before. I drove my foot straight into his groin, making him curl up like a dying cockroach. You're my wife. I spat, my voice shaking with fury, and you have a damn boyfriend. I kicked him again, watching him writhe in pain. Kayla shrieked, stop it. Aaron, stop, but I wasn't finished. I turned toward the moving van, my mind racing. Why is this moving van even here? I demanded. The man groaned, still cradling himself. I didn't like his silence, so I kicked him again, a third time, just to drive the point home. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the two guys from the moving company standing near the truck. Their arms were crossed, amused smirks on their faces as they watched the chaos unfold. I guess they were enjoying the show. If I were in their place, I'd be enjoying the show as well. The wail of sirens pierced the air, and within moments two police cruisers pulled up in front of the house. The officer stepped out, hands resting on their holsters as they took in the scene. Me standing over a battered man, Kayla crouched beside him, and the movers idly watching like spectators at a boxing match. One officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face, quickly moved toward me, placing a firm hand on my chest to separate me from the man on the ground. Step back, sir, he ordered. I clenched my fists but obeyed, taking a step back, still breathing heavily. I'm the one who called you, I said, my voice laced with frustration. The officer raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, I snapped. I got a call from my neighbor saying some guys were loading my furniture into a van. I rushed home and saw this guy. I gestured toward the groaning man still curled up on the pavement, directing them. The officer turned to look at Kayla, who was still on her knees, gently cradling the man's face. Her eyes were red with anger and something else, guilt maybe. Ma'am, what's going on here? The officer asked. Kayla lifted her head, wiping her eyes before answering. This man is Walter Anderson, she said, her voice wavering but determined. He's my boyfriend. My stomach twisted at those words, even though I had already heard them before. Hearing her say it again so plainly, so unapologetically, felt like another punch to the gut. I'm leaving Aaron, she continued, her voice cold, now void of any emotion, and I'm taking my half of the furniture. The officer turned his gaze back to me, studying my expression. I must have looked as dumbfounded as I felt. My mind reeled. 17 years of marriage, a home, a family, all reduced to this, a moving van and a smug bastard named Walter. On my driveway, the officer cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice calm but firm, did you inform your husband that you were leaving? Kayla hesitated, then with a stubborn tilt of her chin. She said no. The officer let out a slow sigh, rubbing his temple. Ma'am, I need you to understand something. He glanced at the moving van before turning back to her. To take any of his furniture, you need to file for divorce first. After the judge orders the assets to be split, both parties will have to sign a legal document listing the assets under each name. Kayla's face paled slightly. What you're doing right now, the officer continued, his tone sharpening, is illegal. If your husband decides to file charges, this will be classified as theft. Kayla gasped at the officer's words, her face flashing with shock and frustration. She turned to the two movers, her voice tight with urgency. Put everything back. She ordered. The men, still amused by the situation, shrugged and began carrying the furniture back inside. The officer crossed his arms and spoke again, his tone making it clear he was done entertaining. Any nonsense, you can leave with your clothes to keep this process smooth. I'll stay here and assist until you're gone. Kayla turned sharply toward him, eyes blazing. My husband should leave, she snapped, glaring at me as though I was the problem here. I quickly shot back. This house belongs to my mother, so she does not have any rights on this house. Kayla screamed back, no, you need to leave. I deserve to live here. That was the final straw for the officer. His patience had clearly run out. Ma'am, you just attempted to steal from your husband, he said, his voice dripping with irritation, and now when you're being given a fair way to move out, you want to throw him out his own home. He scoffed and shook his head. Well, let's see if your husband wants to file charges for theft. He turned to me, waiting for my response before I could speak. Kayla threw her hands up. Fine, I'll get my stuff, she snapped before storming inside. I watched her go, my mind still struggling to process the fact that the woman I had spent 17 years with, the mother of my child, had been sneaking around with another man and had planned to rob me blind before vanishing from my life. A few minutes passed before she reappeared with two large suitcases. As she made her way toward the door, I raised a hand. Hold on, I said, turning to the officer. I want her bags checked. Kayla froze, then turned slowly to face me, her mouth slightly opened in disbelief. Aaron, you have to humiliate me like this, she hissed. Don't you trust me? That was all it took. The two movers, who had been quietly watching the drama unfold, suddenly burst into loud laughter. Even the officers exchanged smirks, one of them shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The officer in charge sighed. Open the bags, ma'am, he said firmly. Your husband has every right to check. With an angry glare, unzipped the first suitcase and stepped aside. I crouched down and started rummaging through it. At first it was just clothes, but then nestled between her sweaters, I spotted my laptop and phone charger. I pulled them out and held them up. She let out a small sigh. I need those. I let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking my head. Get it from your lover, I said coldly. He can take care of you. Now Kayla had left. She had packed her things, taken her true love with her, and walked out of my life. Walter was still limping from the beating I had given him, which brought me some satisfaction, but that satisfaction was short-lived. The house was quiet, now eerily so, and the reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. Then the front door swung open. Judy walked in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her brows furrowed as she took in the mess. The half-moved furniture, the suitcases that had been hastily unpacked, the movers, footprints still marking the floor. She set her bag down and looked at me. Dad, what the hell happened here? I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Come sit down, I said, patting the couch beside me. She sat down, looking at me expectantly. I took a deep breath. Your mother has decided to leave, I said evenly. She's gone with her new lover. Judy blinked. Then to my utter shock, she shrugged and said, oh, you mean Walter? I turned to her, my grip tightening around the whiskey glass in my hand. Wait, you knew about him? She gave me a look as if I was asking a dumb question. Yes, she said, Mom told me about him. He's her first love, her one and only true love. I stared at her, trying to process what I had just heard. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I stood up, walked over to the bar and poured myself a drink, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. Then I turned back, sitting down with a glass in my hand, so I said, my voice carefully controlled, tell me more about this, Walter. Judy leaned back, crossing her arms. Mom always told me about him, she said casually. He was her first love and she never stopped loving him. She married you because, well, you were a good choice, a decent man. I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. A good choice. That was all I had been, not a partner, not someone she loved, just a safe bet. I took a sip of my drink and looked at Judy. So tell me, Judy, do you think your mother did the right thing by leaving me for Walter? She didn't even hesitate. Oh yes, she said matter-of-factly, you were just an arrangement. They were meant to be together. Walter only left her because he had to go abroad for his studies. Now he's back and Mom deserves to be with him. I nodded, slowly swirling the whiskey in my glass. Okay, I muttered. Very interesting. I leaned back, exhaling through my nose as the weight of it all pressed down on me. So I said more to myself than to her, spending all these years with me as my wife. That was just a farce. For the first time, Judy hesitated. There was a brief flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but then just as quickly she shrugged again. Not a farce, she corrected, just a stopgap arrangement. I took another sip of my whiskey, the warmth spreading through my chest, but it did nothing to dull the cold realization settling in my bones. I set the glass down, my fingers tapping against the side, as I processed everything Judy had just said, so I began. If Walter had never left, your mother would have married him and you would have been his daughter. That would have been the perfect scenario, right? Judy's lips curled into a small, dreamy smile. Yes, she said without hesitation, just like a fairy tale romance. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. Interesting, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Then another thought hit me. If Judy had known, who else had been in on this? Who else knows about Walter? I asked, turning my gaze back to her. She barely even thought about it. Oh, Grandma Kelly knows, she said casually. My eyes darkened slightly. Kelly, your mother's mother? Yeah, I nodded. Oh, so she knows. What about Grandpa Greg? Her husband Judy shrugged. Well, he knows as well. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the glass for a brief moment before I forced myself to relax. And how long have you known about this? I asked. Judy leaned back against the couch playing with a loose thread on her sweater. About 6 months, I guess. 6 months, my wife, my daughter, my in-laws, all of them had known and not one of them had said a damn word to me. I nodded again, my mind working faster than my heart could catch up. Very interesting, I said softly, then I stood up. Judy looked at me, curiosity flashing across her face. What are you going to do, Dad? She asked. I turned to her, a slow smile spreading across my lips. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't kindness, it was something else entirely. I'm gonna give everyone exactly what they want. Judy's smile remained unwavering as she looked at me, her expression one of complete certainty. You've done good, Dad, she said, her voice carrying an eerie kind of approval. You gave Mom everything she deserved. Now if she wants to be with her true love, don't stop her. I tilted my head slightly, observing my daughter with quiet amusement. There was no hesitation in her words, no guilt, no second guessing, just a firm belief that her mother had done the right thing. I smiled back, slow and deliberate. Yes, dear, don't worry, I said, my tone smooth and reassuring. I have no intention of stopping your mother. I gave her everything she deserves. I paused for a beat, watching her closely, and I'll make sure she continues to get exactly that in the future. Something flickered in Judy's eyes, but she didn't say anything. I took a step closer and reached out, gently tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. And as for you, my dear princess, I continued, my voice soft but firm, you will also get what you deserve. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment. I let the silence stretch between us before finally pulling away. Then without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out the door. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. By the time I arrived, I already knew exactly what I wanted. Receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, but as soon as I mentioned my name, she quickly directed me to my lawyer's office. Didn't expect to see you today, Aaron, Mr. Jeremy said, leaning back in his chair. What brings you in? I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. I need a divorce, I stated plainly, and I need it expedited. His eyebrows lifted slightly. I see, he said, sitting up straight. Anything specific you want out of this? I leaned forward. I want full control of my assets. I want her cut down to exactly what the law demands. Nothing more, no alimony, no generosity, no loopholes she can use later. If she thinks she deserves better, she can go ask Walter for it. Jeremy nodded slowly, considering my words. In custody, I smirked. Let her have Judy, they deserve each other. He raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. All right, he said, already jotting things down. I'll get the paperwork started and push for a quick resolution. Given the circumstances, this should move fast. Good, I said, standing up, keep me updated. With that, I left and drove straight to the bank. The teller greeted me with a polite nod. How can I help you today, sir? I'd like to withdraw everything from my joint account, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. She tapped on her keyboard, her expression remaining neutral until she saw the balance. Her eyes flicked up to me. Cautious. All of it, sir, all of it, I confirmed and smirked. Actually, no, leave, $2. She hesitated and nodded. A few minutes later, she slid a thick envelope of cash across the counter. Would you like this counted in front of you? No need, I said, tucking the envelope into my coat pocket. Next stop, my office. I parked in my usual spot, walked through the building like it was any other day, and went straight to HR. Hey, Aaron, the HR manager greeted me. Everything all right? Yeah, I sat with a smile. I just need to update my 401k beneficiaries. Remove Kayla, she blinked. Oh sure, we can process that right away. I signed the necessary forms, then moved on to the next task, calling my insurance company. Within minutes, Kayla was wiped off every policy I had, and finally I called my mother. Aaron, is everything okay? I took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. Mom, I said, I think you should hear this from me first. My mother was silent for a moment after I finished explaining everything: Kayla's betrayal, Judy's reaction, the cold certainty in my daughter's words. Then with a sigh, she finally spoke. Well, she said dryly, seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I let out a quiet chuckle. No, it didn't, I agreed. Then my smile turned sharper, but I intend to keep that apple on the tree. Mom didn't say anything, but I could hear her exhale over the phone, a mix of resignation and approval. She knew me well enough to understand that I wasn't going to let this slide. We spoke for a few more minutes before hanging up. The next day was served. I knew exactly where she'd be, at her office, basking in whatever glow her affair with Walter had given her. She had expected this. No doubt she knew I wouldn't take this lying down, but knowing and experiencing are two very different things. At first, she was calm. I imagined she had expected the standard divorce terms: half of everything, a clean split, maybe some alimony to keep her comfortable. She probably thought I would be predictable. She thought wrong, because as she flipped through those documents, her expression changed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages, and then just like that, I saw it, the panic, the realization. She had nothing. The house not in my name, she had no claim to it. The furniture also not hers. Alimony out of the question. Our salaries were nearly identical. All she was getting was child support, and that too for only 2 more years, until Judy turned 18. She must have read the papers over and over again, hoping she had missed something, that there was some loophole she could exploit, but there was nothing. I had made sure of that. Not long after my phone rang, I let it ring twice before answering. My voice calm. Hello, this is not fair. Kayla's voice came through, sharp and frantic. I'm supposed to get half of everything, that's how this works. I leaned back in my chair, smiling to myself. Oh, I said, my tone light, almost amused. Yes, she snapped, I was your wife, I deserve half. I let a slow breath slip through my lips. Then with deliberate patience I replied, and I'm supposed to get half of yours. There was silence on the other end. I could almost picture the gears turning in her head, the realization sinking in. I smiled wider, better we settle it in court. The day of the divorce hearing finally arrived. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer Ron Jeremy, who has always looked smug and pleased with himself, a shark in a suit. He thrived in situations like these, and I had no doubt he was about to enjoy every moment of this. A few minutes later, Kayla arrived with her lawyer Rhodes. The moment Ron saw her, he licked his lips and muttered under his breath, I'm going to smash her. I turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Ditto, I said without thinking. Ron gave me a side glance before smirking. I meant in court, he clarified, though the twinkle in his eyes told me. We both knew he meant the same thing. I felt a flicker of embarrassment, but the absurdity of the moment almost made me chuckle. Then the judge entered the courtroom and all conversations came to a halt. Lana stood up first, her expression professional and composed as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, my client's husband has refused to pay her any alimony or offer her any settlement. We are demanding half of all his assets, as is rightfully hers under marital law. The judge barely had time to react before Ron stood up, smoothing out his suit as he spoke. Your Honor, my client's wife has also refused to give him half of her assets and has declined to pay any settlement. The judge frowned, shifting his gaze between us. What exactly are you saying? Ron took a few casual steps toward the bench. Well, Your Honor, they both make nearly identical salaries. I find myself at a bit of a crossroads. Should I be demanding alimony for my client or offering it? The judge looked at both Kayla and me, then exhaled sharply. If both parties make the same amount, then neither qualifies for alimony. Kayla tensed her hands, clenching into fists on the table, but before she could protest, Lana quickly jumped in. Your Honor, my client would also like to bring to your attention that Aaron emptied their joint account, leaving only $2. Ron didn't even flinch. In fact, he looked positively delighted. He stepped forward smoothly. That is exactly what my client's wife contributed to that account. There was a pause. The judge turned to Kayla, his expression expectant. Anything else? Lana hesitated before nodding. Yes, Your Honor, there is also the matter of child custody. Before she could say another word, Ron cut in smoothly. His voice is confident. As ever, we have offered the other party full custody. My client does not wish for visitation, and we will continue to pay child support for the next 2 years until she turns 18. Judy gasped audibly, her voice cracking as she cried out. You cannot leave me, Dad. I'm your daughter. I didn't turn back to look at her, my jaw tight. My hands curled into fists under the table, but I kept my eyes forward. I had made my decision and I needed to see it through. The judge, however, turned his attention to Judy. His expression softened as he gestured toward her. Would you like to say something? Please come forward. Judy hesitated for a moment before stepping up to the witness stand. She looked small, vulnerable when she finally spoke. Her voice wavered. I didn't know that my father didn't love me. Before she could continue, Ron stood up, adjusting his suit with calculated ease. Your Honor, may I ask the young lady a few questions? Lana immediately objected. Your Honor, she's just a child. The judge raised a hand to silence her. Let it be, he said. Proceed, Mr. Jeremy. Ron stepped toward Judy. Young lady, do you love your father? Judy sniffled, then nodded. Yes. Ron nodded back. Do you respect your father? Another sniff. Yes. There was a beat of silence before Ron asked the next question. Why are your parents divorcing? Judy's lip trembled. Because my mother's ex has returned from Europe and now they want to be together, so she's leaving him. Ron tilted his head slightly. So it means that your mother either never loved your father or she loved her ex more than your father. Judy opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stared at Ron, then at the floor. As silence filled the courtroom, Judy shifted uncomfortably. Her tear-streaked face glancing between him and me. I still refused to turn toward her. My hands remained folded. This moment, this exact moment, was what I had been waiting for. So tell me, Judy, Ron continued. Were you upset for your father losing his marriage? Judy hesitated. I saw her glance at me, searching for something in my face, but I didn't give her anything. She turned back to Ron, her lips trembling, then quietly she admitted, no, I was happy for my mother. Ron raised an eyebrow. Happy for your mother? Judy nodded, sniffling. Yes. Ron exhaled through his nose, rubbing his chin in exaggerated thought. I see. So Judy, you didn't care how your father felt about all of this. You were fine with the divorce. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Yes, Mom was gonna be with her true love. Ron let out a low whistle and shook his head. Wow, true love. He paced for a moment before stopping and looking Judy in the eyes. So Judy, let me get this straight. You didn't care about your father's feelings. You asked him not to stop this divorce. You told him to just let your mother go. You expected him to lose his wife and move on because your mother deserved to be happy. Judy bit her lip, her breathing uneven. Yes, she whispered. Ron's expression hardened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice, making sure every word sank in. Then tell me, Judy, why should he care for you? Judy's silence was deafening. The courtroom, which had been filled with whispers and shifting glances, now felt like a vacuum. Every breath measured, every heartbeat. Audible, she stared at Ron, eyes wide, lips parted as if the weight of his words had just knocked the air from her lungs. Ron never wanted to hesitate, leaned slightly forward, his voice sharp but steady. Now let me ask you one final question, Judy. He let the moment stretch just long enough for the tension to mount. This is something you told your father word for word. Let me quote him. Ron turned to me briefly, then back to her. If Walter had never left, your mother would have married him and you would have been his daughter. That would have been the perfect scenario, right? He let the words hang in the air. Then his eyes locked onto hers. Your reply was yeah, just like a fairy tale romance. Judy inhaled sharply. Ron took a step closer, voice unwavering. Is that correct, Judy? She hesitated, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the truth. She had so easily spoken before. Yes, she finally admitted. Ron nodded as if that answer was all he needed, but he wasn't done. You wanted to be Walter's daughter. You wanted to abandon the father who stayed awake all night when you were suffering from a fever last year. The father who never missed a single recital, never missed a single parent-teacher meeting, never missed a single sports event. Judy squeezed her eyes shut as if trying to block out his words, but he continued relentless. You wanted to abandon the same man who made sure you had your roller skates when he was still wearing the same 3 shirts to the office for the last 2 years. He shook his head, his voice almost incredulous. The same man who right now is giving you exactly what you want to be, a family with Walter and your mother. He let the silence settle once more. Let the weight of it press against her. Then with one final question he delivered the blow. What is wrong with that? Judy broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as her shoulders shook. I'm sorry, Dad, she choked out between her tears. I wasn't thinking straight. Please don't abandon me. For the first time in that courtroom, I felt my composure slipping. My throat tightened and my vision blurred. For a second I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that I would always be there. I couldn't, I had to stay firm. I clenched my jaw and kept my posture rigid, forcing myself to hold back, the storm brewing inside me. The judge, who had been watching the entire exchange with sharp eyes, finally exhaled and turned to Judy. That's enough, young lady, he said, his voice softer. Now you may step down. Judy sniffled and wiped at her tear-streaked face as she walked back to her seat, her sobs quieter but still present. Then the judge turned his piercing gaze to Lana Ms. Rhodes. He said, his tone carrying an edge of impatience. I believe Mr. Jeremy interrupted you earlier. You may continue. Lana stood up, her usual smugness plastered across her face. Thank you, Your Honor. She straightened her blazer and cleared her throat. My client and her fiancé do not want custody of the child. They're getting married and do not wish for the child to be in their presence. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. The judge's face turned an alarming shade of red. His eyes flicked toward Kayla, who was sitting stiffly, avoiding everyone's gaze. Judy, upon hearing those words, broke down even further. The sound of her crying filled the room, raw and painful, cutting through the silence like a blade. The judge rubbed his temples, looking completely exasperated. Then he turned to me. Mr. Taylor, he said, his voice dripping with frustration. You don't want custody. Your wife doesn't want custody. What are you two doing? Your arrogance and ego will destroy the life of this child. I exhaled, slowly gathering my thoughts before standing. Your Honor, my mother Brenda Thomas will take custody. I have already spoken to her and she has agreed to take full responsibility for Judy. The judge studied me for a long moment before nodding. Without hesitation, he banged his gavel against the bench. The child will go under the custody of Mrs. Brenda Taylor. He declared both parents will be required to pay child support. He paused and then continued. There is no need for alimony or settlements. The divorce is granted. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood echoed through the courtroom, final and absolute. I turned to look at Ron, who had been watching the entire exchange with a bemused expression. He let out a small chuckle and leaned toward me. That he whispered. Grinning was the fastest divorce in the history of mankind. After the court adjourned, I made my way to my mother. Judy was already there, sitting beside her. Her head bowed, tears still streaming down her face. My mother had a gentle hand on her back, rubbing slow circles in an attempt to soothe her, but Judy's sobs didn't let up. I took a deep breath and sat down next to her. For a moment I just watched her cry, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle on my shoulders. Then softly I spoke. Sweetheart, I said, my voice calm, firm. We don't live in a fairy tale, we live in the real world. Judy lifted her head slightly, her swollen eyes meeting mine. She sniffled but didn't say anything. I never wanted to abandon you. I continued, but I needed you to understand how it feels when the people you love turn their backs on you, like you're nothing more than an old pair of sneakers used and discarded. She flinched at my words, fresh tears brimming in her eyes. I could tell she wanted to protest, but she remained silent, listening. We forget what people have done for us because we believe it was their duty to serve us. I went on, my gaze steady, and in return, we think they don't deserve anything. Not love, not gratitude. Not even basic respect. Judy wiped at her nose with the sleeve of her sweater. Her lips trembled, but she was absorbing every word. Love is a two-way street, I told her. You give love, you get love. You give respect, you get respect. But if you give hate, you get hate. In return, she sniffed, her hands gripping each other tightly in her lap. I have always loved you, I said, my voice softer now, but in return all I got was humiliation. It hurt, Judy, more than you'll ever know. Her breath hitched and she looked away, ashamed. If I had let you walk over me today, you would have walked over someone else in the future, I told her, and not everyone will be like me. Not everyone will just walk away. One day you might hurt someone who won't. Just take it. They'll give you back the same humiliation, maybe even more. Judy closed her eyes, her small frame trembling, then in a whisper so quiet I almost missed it, she said, no, that wouldn't be good. She opened her eyes again, looking at me with a sorrow I hadn't seen before. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered, and then without hesitation she threw herself into my arms, wrapping me in a tight embrace. Her body shook against mine as she buried her face in my chest, sobbing harder than before. I held her close, feeling her pain, her regret, her sorrow, all of it pouring out in that moment. After a few minutes, slowly lifted her head from my chest. Her face was streaked with tears. Her eyes red and swollen, but there was something different in her gaze. Now something softer, more thoughtful. She sniffled and wiped her face with the back of her hand before looking up at me hesitantly. What about Mom? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. I exhaled a sad smile, tugging at the corners of my lips. I knew this question would come. Eventually, I reached out and gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, before speaking. Well, I said she made her choice to abandon me, to abandon you, and to move on with her life. Judy's lower lip trembled, but she didn't look away. She needed to hear this. The only thing we can do now is let fate decide, I continued. There's no point in chasing someone who doesn't want to stay, but you know what? We should be happy that we still have each other. She frowned slightly, trying to understand, so I elaborated. Look at it this way, I said gently. She never truly loved me, so she spared me from living a lie, and as painful as it is, she abandoned you too, which means she spared you from false hope. We're left with what's real. No lies, no betrayal, just the truth. Judy's eyes shimmered with fresh tears, but this time there was a new understanding in them. She bit her lip. Then without warning, she leaned forward and hugged me again tightly, as if afraid to let go. Thanks, Dad, she whispered. A few months passed and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Judy had begun to smile more, to heal in her own way, and our bond had grown stronger. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but we had each other, and that was enough. Then one fine afternoon, Judy burst through the front door, her face practically glowing with excitement. I was sitting on the couch reading the newspaper when she rushed in. You won't believe what I just heard, she exclaimed, barely able to contain herself. I set the paper down and turned to her, raising an eyebrow. What? She grinned. That Walter guy, he beat the hell out of Mom. For a split second, I was stunned. Then before I could stop myself, I let out a short, amused laugh. I wasn't proud of it, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't help it. Judy's eyes widened at my reaction, but then as the absurdity of it all sank in, she too let out a small chuckle. Did you anticipate that? She asked, shaking her head in disbelief. I smirked. Well, I was married to your mother for almost 2 decades. I know firsthand that listening to her whine every single day is a special kind of punishment. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I guess their fairy tale was written by the brothers Grimm. Judy laughed a little harder at that, but then her expression sobered. So how is she? She asked. In the hospital, she said, and Walter, he's in jail. I exhaled through my nose, nodding figures. Judy tilted her head slightly. I have a feeling she'll be calling you soon. I was about to respond when Maria walked out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had been making dinner, but now she looked between the two of us. Curious, did I miss anything? She asked. Judy turned to her, a soft knowing smile on her face. Nope, she said, you didn't miss anything. Mom, dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.